So I guess we're ready to go. Good morning, everyone. It's Friday, March 26th, and this is the Agricultural Committee. We're holding our morning meeting in regards to H218. It's an issue dealing with the sale of unpasteurized raw milk. And we have three guests with us this morning. And I've got you down on my sheet, Julie and Elizabeth, and then Molly. But if you need to switch that for time constraints or anything, I'd be glad to change that order if it would help any of you. If not, we'll run by the order.
Okay.
Good. So, Elizabeth, it's good to have you with us. And you're from the health department, and you can introduce yourself and your title.
Sure. Thank you very much to the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today, and just let me know if you can't hear me. So I'll just introduce myself and Julia. So my name is Elizabeth Wersing. I'm the Senior Environmental Health Program Manager at the Health Department. So I oversee the Food and Lodging Program, which was our food safety program at the Health Department. And I'm joined today by Julia Brennan, who is our infectious disease enteric epidemiologist and a nurse practitioner. And she's responsible for a lot of the foodborne illness surveillance at the health department. So Dr. Quitt, who had testified in front of the House committee, is not available today. So we will represent the department and can happily answer questions you might have. And we did want to point to the health department has submitted written testimony on this topic, hopefully to both committees. Hopefully you've been able to obtain that. And so I'll just summarize a few of the key points from the department. And one thing we wanted to do was just make sure our position is clarified on this particular bill and that you heard it from us. So the department does not support expanding retail sales of raw milk. And this position has been consistent over the years. And our concerns are really about protecting public health and the increased risk of foodborne illness that can come with increased availability of raw milk. Our concerns about public health are consistent with some of the concerns you heard yesterday presented by Dr. Henderson from VVMA and Dr. Smith. And I hope we can all agree that the infections that can occur from drinking raw milk are bad and should be avoided if possible. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the data from the health department that I think you might be interested in. So while many infections transmitted through consumption of raw milk can cause diarrheal illness, there can also be more severe illness that can result, even death, sepsis, kidney failure, paralysis, and miscarriage or stillbirths, especially in the elderly or in children under 5 years of age, pregnant women, or individuals with weakened immune systems. And we wanted to just clarify some of the references to illness in Vermont and share some of the data from Vermont. So each year, the health department does interview folks, cases of illness, reportable illness that the health department receives where raw milk exposure or drinking raw milk is reported. So from 2015 through 2019, there were 55 cases of campylobacteriosis, so that's from the Campylobacter bacteria, 18 cases of cryptosporidiosis, and 9 cases of Shiga toxin producing E. coli. So that's STEC, that's a more severe causing illness, E. coli. And these are among people who consumed raw milk and reported through the health department surveillance systems. From 2015 through 2017, there were 7 cases of salmonella in people who consumed raw milk reported. Last year, 4 people who reported consuming raw milk or milk products were hospitalized, and the youngest was a 2-year-old child. We luckily have had no deaths reported between 2015 and 19, which is a success. For outbreaks are detected and investigated by the health department. And again, these are really come to us through the reportable disease system usually. The last significant outbreak tied to a Vermont or located in Vermont was in 2010, which is a success. But the health department did participate in 2017 in a multi-state investigation of Listeria monocytogenes infections. So meaning there were cases in multiple states, and it included a Vermont resident. So there were 8 people infected with the outbreak strain of Listeria from 4 states. All 8 people were hospitalized, including 2 people who died, and 1 was a Vermonter. One of the illnesses was reported in a newborn, and cases were traced to a common source of, in this case, it was raw milk cheese from a creamery in New York State. There's also currently a national Listeria outbreak happening associated with unpasteurized milk cheese that has resulted in 11 cases, 10 hospitalizations, and 1 death. This outbreak is ongoing. At this time, there are no Vermonters associated with that outbreak. So we share this because we just want to convey to you that reports to the health department of foodborne illness often represent just the tip of the iceberg of the overall foodborne illness burden. So these are people that have experienced illness and have contacted a medical provider, obtained a test, and been diagnosed with a reportable disease. So in epidemiology, we know that the burden of illness is often greater than what is reported to the department alone. So for example, some people may experience diarrhea and stick it out at home. So the cases that come to us may represent the more severe illness. So it's estimated that for every case of brucellosis diagnosed, there are approximately 15 additional undiagnosed cases. For Campylobacter, there are additional 30 undiagnosed cases. For STEC, that more severe E. coli, there are additional 26 cases. And Salmonella, an additional 29. For cryptosporidiosis, it's estimated there are an additional 99 undiagnosed cases, for every confirmed case. We also wanted to share that it is notable that during COVID-19 response, while the respiratory illness reports have decreased in Vermont, the reports of enteric infections have remained steady, despite barriers to accessing medical care during this time. So this means that the diseases spread through contaminated food and water have not decreased during last year. So I think you've heard a lot about the concerns about unpasteurized milk. Nationally, 81% of outbreaks reported in the US are from states where the sale of raw milk is legal. And raw milk is 150 times more likely to cause an outbreak than pasteurized milk. One of our main concerns is that consumers that purchase food products in retail settings often assume that the food is safe and free of pathogens that can cause illness. Consumers may be unaware of the risks of drinking raw milk, so they're unable to make an educated choice. Expanding access to raw milk, our concern is will increase the likelihood of human illness and outbreaks in Vermont. So while adherence to good hygienic practices during the milking process can reduce the risk of milk contamination, pasteurization is the only way to ensure that milk and the products made from it do not contain harmful pathogens. Before the widespread use of pasteurization, milk caused over 25% of all foodborne outbreaks. We do understand that selling raw milk poses an economic opportunity for producers. Our concern is really that some of this will just shift the burden to healthcare associated costs, the state costs of investigation and regulation of illness, shifting some of that back onto the farmer and the CSA in this case for the liability when there's human illness possibly linked to their product. And lastly, Vermont is not an island. So once the product leaves the farm, it's challenging to control who might consume that milk. So it's possible that expanding access could cause illness in residents of other states. We see multi-state outbreaks often associated with lots of different food products. But most recently, there's been a Campylobacter outbreak associated with raw milk consumption in New Hampshire, which I believe another person might have referenced for you. This is very recent. It happened last month, and it actually across 3 states. So there's cases across 3 states. Some of the later numbers suggest there's been 50 cases of illness associated with this raw milk consumption, both adults and children, and requiring at least 1 hospitalization. So New Hampshire is still finalizing the details of that investigation. But it has the potential to affect other states being tied back to that product. So I will stop there and see if you have any questions that we can try our best to answer for you. Thank you so much for your time in letting us speak with you.
You're muted, Mr. Chair. Bobby, you're muted. But I'll take the floor if that's all right.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm curious. I don't pretend to know a lot about raw milk, but we did a small change to it a few years ago. The health department's universally been opposed to this, as you said. CDC doesn't support raw milk. So it sounds like the medical world is of one voice here. But looking at state policies across the country, that is not the prevailing policy. There is, only a handful of states that bar raw milk. Any idea why there's a mismatch?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Pearson. I think we would agree with you that there is likely agreement across public health professionals and perhaps academia. While we can provide the best information to the folks that make laws, we do not make the laws ourselves. So some of those decisions may be made essentially not by public health, but by the leaders in the state. You're right that the different laws vary greatly across the country in terms of what can be sold legally and how. So that is definitely not consistent from state to state.
So you think it's just politics? I mean, it's not it's totally lopsided. I think there's 12 or something states that don't permit raw milk. Some of them have them in stores. I mean, we're kind of in the middle, it seems like to me, if not more on the stringent end. But you just think it's politics, basically.
I think each state has their lawmaking process and may consider different viewpoints and perspectives and information. So I can't speak to what might be happening, but I think the public health professionals' opinion is consistent with the just concerns about the protection of public health, which is just what we are responsible for.
Thanks.
Do you know if there's any cross-state liability if, like this New Hampshire situation where there's other states involved? Is there any liability on the state that causes, or the people come from a state that causes this illness, these illnesses?
Thank you for the question. I am not a lawyer, so I will not pretend to try to answer that. I think what we could share is from our perspective doing outbreak investigations. So for example, that 2017 creamery outbreak, to my knowledge, that creamery has not reopened following that outbreak. So I think there is a risk to the producer for sure if an outbreak investigation happens. I can't speak to the state liability, which I believe was your question, but I think in the case of illness or death, there is always a concern for the producer, and depending on the outcomes, that may determine the severity.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering if you're a state that allows it, like we're the one of the 12, and we promote it by opening up markets for it, if somebody from, wherever came and bought some of this and got deathly ill, and they followed, the rules that we have, and they still got deathly ill, if there'd be any possibility of liability back on not just the producer, but the state itself for allowing and promoting it. But we can check with TJ and somebody there to answer that question. Other questions? Brian, Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the moment in Vermont, raw milk can be sold at farmers markets and right on the farm. Those are the only two places from what I'm remembering from what we have currently in statute. So if you could, Elizabeth, just sort of hit the high points again. I just was trying to read through your testimony that you submitted while you were testifying, which isn't always a good idea because sometimes I miss what you were saying. I understand the notion that if people go into a grocery store, one of our chain grocery stores, and there are packages or bottles or cartons of pasteurized milk and then raw milk, I understand that there's sort of I don't want to say a problem, but we have to make sure that there's an informed decision being made if someone just picks up one of the raw milk things, assuming that it's 100% safe and there won't be any negative impacts from that. So besides the increased availability on a retail landscape, what other things would change and make the Department of Health still reluctant to go along with this? I understand about going in shopping and saying, oh, just grab a carton of milk, and then somebody grabs and it's the wrong one and they don't understand that it's raw milk. I asked the question yesterday on a farm stand, if it wasn't staffed all the time, to me, it could set up a situation where, again, there could be issues because it would still have to be refrigerated on that farm stand from what we're reading in the bill. And yet, if no one's there, how do you really know that it was kind of thing? So anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. So certainly, yes, the temperature control is always a concern. So the products needing to maintain the cold chain below 41 degrees Fahrenheit, from production to service to sale. I think you have a good point about one of the requirements currently is that the milk be picked up essentially with the producer or close to the producer so that, the questions and concerns of the public can be discussed. We know that currently raw milk drinkers are making that choice, and they have usually informed themselves of the concerns and have reasons that they want to drink the raw milk. So I think the concern is once the product is more widely available, and you go to the grocery store and just grab your milk, a lot of times consumers may not be fully informed of the possible risks. There's a lot of information on the internet from various groups. And so just making sure the public has all the information they need to make an informed choice about that product. If the product is sold through a CSA, I'm thinking about some of the CSAs I've participated in. I don't get to pick and choose what I get in my CSA. Sometimes there's some information about the product, but not always. If I want to ask questions about it, who do I ask to that? So, making the product a little more mainstream, I think there are some education of the public that would be needed so that they can make an informed choice to choose to take on that risk that can be associated with raw milk.
Thank you.
Corey?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate, I'm not in support of this bill, and this makes it, I want to first say our health department's done a great job in the past year, and we've chosen as a state to follow science and health guidelines and not politics with COVID. And I think they're laying out pretty clear here that it's not safe to expand this to Vermonters. So I'm just going to continue to register my opposition to one, having raw milk sales be legal anyway, but two, expanding it any further than it is.
So any other questions for Elizabeth right now? If not, we'll move on to Julia.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Quitt registered or submitted her written testimony, so and Elizabeth read kind of our combined position and ideas. So I'm happy to answer additional questions that you weren't able to ask Elizabeth, but I don't have more to contribute other than the health department doesn't support expanding the sale of raw milk.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there are other questions at this point, but as we get in further into the bill, we may have additional questions, and Linda has your contact information, I hope, and so we could get back in touch with you if we have additional questions that we need answered. Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. I don't mean to dominate the discussion here, but we heard testimony yesterday from both Molly and Kent, and I seem to get different answers about the testing. We talked about the PCR testing. I think there's only one place in Vermont that is able to do that, and I don't remember the number. I'm trying to recall what Kent said, that for $25 you can get, I think he said 4 pathogens tested. And then Molly was clear that, and I believe her example was from out of state. She's with us, so I'm sure she'll remember. I want to say it was Cornell, maybe. There's another place where you can send a sample, and it was more like $110 or $120, $125 every time you did it, which, if you're trying to sell raw milk and make a profit, there's diminishing returns if you're spending more on finding out how safe it is than if you're. So could you shed any light, either Julia or Elizabeth, on what you know about the testing availability?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So food, and I assume you're talking about pathogen testing in the raw milk. So it's testing the milk for Campylobacter, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our experience with pathogen testing or food safety testing it is challenging. In some ways, you are looking for a needle in a haystack. So you're submitting a sample for testing. The pathogen may not be evenly distributed throughout the product, throughout a large, container of the product, for example. So testing a sample here and there may give you information about that sample, but would really need to be done, in our opinion, in a representative way to really represent, that product overall, or that batch, for example. You're right that pathogen testing costs can vary greatly depending on the type of test also that is done. There may be some quick initial PCR testing that may be faster and also potentially cheaper. But for example, our laboratory to do a PCR test, our public health laboratory, to culture an isolate, so something that could actually be linked to a clinical isolate, so like a fecal sample from a patient that has Campylobacter, it's 5 to 6 days. It's probably a couple $100s. So the testing can be significant. And also, I think what we would just comment on is it's not a foolproof way to ensure public health. It will give you some information about that particular sample, but our concern might be providing some false security for a pathogen in raw milk before it is sold. Now, I know there are also animal health regular testing that is done on the herd, which is not necessarily what I'm speaking about, but for example, requiring a clean sample before a bottle of raw milk can be sold is going to be challenging and potentially not economical for the farmer if you are looking for something that would represent everything that they're selling, for example. Would just be my thought on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, one issue that keeps coming up is, people want the choice. They want to be able to make up their own minds what they buy. And it puts people like us in, kind of not bad, but awkward positions. Okay, in the sale of a product that we hear from all the professionals and people that actually, know all about the products, that it's not in the best interest of people to drink it. And yet they'll get in line to buy, to buy raw milk. And that's what they prefer, not just dairy milk. They buy a lot of goat milk as well. So anyways, we'll keep working on this as we move forward. And do you have any questions of us for us?
No, I think we thank you again for the opportunity and certainly recognize, a lot of very hard decisions that the legislature has to make. And we just wanted to provide you the information that may just present the health department's data perspective, because it's not stuff that normally is widely publicized or in the media. For example, outbreaks are kind of investigated and the risk limited to the public. So please do feel free to reach out if you have additional questions, because we do agree that it is a choice and people should have a right to make a choice if they choose to drink raw milk. We just want to make sure folks are aware of the risks for making that choice. Thank you.
Well, I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank both of you for your time this morning. And if we run into an issue and need to contact you, we'll be in touch.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Thank you.
We'll stick around in case there's any additional questions, after Molly testifies as well. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. So our next witness is Molly Willis. And morning, Molly. It's good to have you back with us again. So we'll let you pick up where you left off or yesterday, and we'll get started. So welcome.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share a few thoughts. And I would like to just emphasize that raw milk is a highly regulated food, and it is one of the most regulated foods that has the least amount of market access. So farmers are truly producing an exemplary product, and I look forward to When this committee hears testimony from the agricultural community, dairy farmers have brought copies of their milk sample test results to show to the committee, and there is virtually zero bacteria in those tests. We currently test for somatic cell count, coliform, and total bacteria, and the test results that these farmers are receiving back are exemplary. And I would just like to open with that, and then I think back up a little bit just to revisit some of the history about raw milk and why we're in the position that we are. Raw milk has been consumed for thousands of years, and milk production moved off family farms and into concentrated urban environments in the 1800s. And that was mostly due to commodification, which led to unsanitary conditions and so-called swill milk, which was being produced in urban areas. And this resulted in outbreaks of raw milk linked to sickness. And by the turn of the century, pasteurization had become the norm. There was a doctor named Henry Point, who was a medical doctor, and he actually had lost a child in the late 1800s due to contamination of this swill milk, but he continued to see the benefits for treating chronic disease with raw milk, and he began to certify medical milk in 1893 for use in hospitals. And this program continued for nearly 100 years with no issue. And I think it's important to speak to something that was raised earlier about why regulations are different from state to state. And the answer to that, I believe quite firmly, is that Vermont is a dairy industry state. And we have very strong dairy industry lobbies in order to protect that community. And rural Vermont serves all interests of all farmers. But we do believe in equal opportunity. And we do believe that consumption for this product and interest for this product is only expanding. We have hundreds of consumers who recently signed on to a letter of support for this bill, wanting easier access to raw milk. And as I mentioned, over 30 farm stands and CSAs that are clamoring to sell this product because their customers are asking them about it on a weekly basis. The small herd size and strict regulations have led to a good safety record in Vermont, and I'm very thankful to hear some clarification from the Department of Health. And I still think it's important to distinguish sicknesses that come from processed raw dairy products, which is the vast majority of outbreaks, seem to be linked to products like cheese and ice cream. And just to be clear, that is not what we are talking about here. And also, other states have different regulations. As we have mentioned, New Hampshire, Maine, and Connecticut all allow for both value added and retail sales. And in New Hampshire, there is no regulation if you are selling less than 20 quarts a day. And so Vermont regulators have done a very good job putting into place regulations that are keeping our consumers and our farmers safe. The small herd size of raw milk producers, often a couple cows to 10 cows, sometimes more, allows farmers to have a much closer eye on the health of their animals. It's actually quite different from other arms of dairy farming. And although there is possibility for severe illness to come from consuming raw milk, that is a possibility for consuming a broad variety of foods. And just like consuming a broad variety of foods, it's not happening very frequently. And actually, by encouraging raw milk producers to become tier 2 and therefore follow the additional regulations that are required by tier 2 producers, you are holding them to a higher and safer standard for this product. So I think there's actually a strong argument for how this bill could elevate safety in the state for the people that are already producing and consuming raw milk. We heard some numbers from the Department of Health about cases of E. coli and Salmonella and Campylobacter. And I'm curious, it sounded, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like those were numbers of what was reported in the state at large, not related to raw milk. And I just wanted to make that distinction. And again, bring up the fact that a lot of the outbreaks in New Hampshire and Maine are related to cheese. And with all due respect to Dr. Kent Henderson, he opened his testimony yesterday talking about how this committee was discussing legalizing value-added raw dairy products. And that is not in the bill. And I would just like to bring into light that there is a knee-jerk reaction against anything related to raw milk from a lot of folks in Vermont. And the truth is that these farmers have been producing a high-quality product for 12 years now, and they're doing an excellent job. And they've been doing an excellent job without receiving a lot of support. And again, this product is not going anywhere. It is our responsibility, I believe, to support these farmers, to help them do a better job, and to help them achieve some level of economic success selling their products to keep everyone safe. Farmers are currently solely liable if anything happens from a consumer drinking their raw milk. It is 1000% in their best interest to provide the safest product that they possibly can. And raw milk consumers are an incredibly educated group of people. We heard testimony from farmers, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to again, that they are incredibly diligent and responsible. They have to provide full contact information in order to purchase raw milk. There is a warning label that I can read you the language of, just so we all know. It says, unpasteurized raw milk, keep refrigerated. Consuming raw unpasteurized milk may cause illness, particularly in children, seniors, and persons with weakened immune systems, and pregnant women. So this label is on the bottle of milk itself. It is also posted in a sign in the milk room or the farm stand where the person is picking up the milk. And it is actually quite difficult for someone to mistake this product as pasteurized milk that they would be buying in the store. It doesn't actually taste very much like pasteurized milk, and there will be about 2 inches of cream on the top of it if you don't shake that bottle. And so I would like to give our consumers some credit for helping hold up their end of the bargain of maintaining safety. So we've already proven that we can maintain a cold storage chain of custody with the fact that Tier 2 producers can currently deliver raw milk to customers' homes and also sell it at farmers markets. So we have been successfully keeping this product cold and safe. And the other reality is that the vast majority of raw milk currently consumed in the state is being purchased at unstaffed farm stands, and that is working. We are closing fridge doors. We are maintaining the safety of this product. And there is actually a federal ban against raw milk crossing state lines, and I think that's important to bring in here. And so if someone is purchasing raw milk and then bringing it to another state, I believe that would, and this would probably be a question for perhaps Michael O'Grady, but I think that would shift liability if they are breaking a federal law in that way. And there is actually wonderful peer-reviewed research out there about how beneficial raw milk can be in cases of asthma and allergies and supporting the microbiome. And this has been a medicinal product that has been used for many, many years. I very much hope that we can bring farmers' voices in to share their experiences over the last 12 years of this being a regulated product in Vermont. And I, again, would just like us to remember that there is a difference in outbreaks that have occurred related to value-added products, to people that have been operating outside of the regulations, to people that have been operating without regulations, as is the case in other states. And also, I know one of those outbreaks was actually linked to, I believe it was a vaccine or antibiotic use, and it didn't actually have anything to do with the milk. And just lastly, I would like to bring a little bit of clarity to the question that was raised about testing, because currently milk sample testing is required, as I've discussed. But I think the confusion came from the human pathogen testing, which is not currently conducted. And to clarify, that was something that was proposed by Representative Rosenquist in an amendment on the House floor. And in the statute currently, raw milk has to be tested at an accredited lab, and UVM is not an accredited lab. So that $25 quote that we heard would not actually fulfill what's currently required in the statute. In speaking with lab representatives from the Cornell lab, I was quoted upwards of $160 minimum, and that was the low end of what it would cost to have these tests, the human pathogen tests, done. And that does not include the overnight refrigerated shipment that would also have to be part of this. And the Vermont State Lab currently recommends that farmers either hand deliver their samples or expedite ship them in a water and ice slurry. And I went to the post office and I measured out a box, and the very minimum it would cost to overnight ship something would be $30, closer to 40 mostly. And there's actually no guarantee that that sample would arrive within the current temperature requirements. And so if we're asking farmers to add on additional testing requirements, I think it's very important to acknowledge how little support they currently receive. There's no milk trucks that are picking up these samples and delivering them to the lab. Farmers are very much on their own. And with shipping and the way that the Postal Service is currently operating, it is a gamble that your samples could actually get to the lab in the time that it is required. And it opens farmers up to increased liability shipping any of their samples because it's out of their control. And if that sample reaches a temperature that is higher than 40 degrees and they get a bad test result, they have to cease sales entirely until that test result is corrected. And that might not sound, that sounds like a smart thing, absolutely. But if you think about someone who is also producing commodity milk or perhaps processing their dairy and have larger herd sizes, cows do not stop producing milk ever. And it breaks my heart to see farmers dumping milk. And the fact that we are asking Vermont raw dairy producers to jump through such extraordinary hoops when the reality is that they have been doing an exemplary job, it shows that it disappoints me that we can't try to figure out more ways to support diversified farms in this state, because they are truly the future. And I think it's important to remember that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Molly. Are there questions? Chris has a question.
Actually, Molly's reminded me of something, reading the warning, that I'd love to ask maybe Elizabeth, if she's still with us. Thanks, Elizabeth. So pre-COVID, I used to enjoy going to restaurants, and you will see on the menu without fail, eating, undercooked or whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I shamelessly eat sushi, and I'm not sad if my medium rare steak is a little more on the rare side. Can you help me understand, like, the point is that there are risks everywhere in things that we would never consider actually limiting sales. I mean, you can walk up to a farm stand, open the fridge, and take out a piece of steak and take it home and do what you want with it. And nobody's, advising you how to keep that steak in your car. And, so there just are these risks. Help me understand, like, is that equivalent in risk? Is that 50 times the risk of raw milk, or 5% the risk of raw milk? Pull that together for me if you can, or maybe it's an impossible comparison, but I would just like to understand that better.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Pearson. A few things come to mind that maybe we could talk about briefly. So you're right, there is a consumer advisory that's required on menus for those undercooked items. So For example, undercooked burgers, medium rare ground beef burger, which does pose risk potentially for the STEC, the E. coli infections as well. The health department has investigated a few actually outbreaks more recently associated with consumption of undercooked beef burgers, even including cases that were children. So there is a risk naturally with that product as well. Ground beef is highly regulated through the meat inspection programs in states and USDA, and there is testing that's required of that product for things like STEC, for example, in that avenue. And the Agency of Agriculture may be able to speak more to the regulated meat industry than I am. But similarly with oysters, there is a shellfish sanitation program where there's water, the harvesting waters, some requirements for temperature control, some requirements for controlling Vibrio, which is a virus that can be associated with eating raw oysters, for example, in some cases. So there is a risk with some of these other food products, as Molly pointed out as well. Our concern is we want the public to be aware of those risks and notified also of the potential risk. So the FDA food code in states that have adopted more recent versions of the food code, which we do need to do in Vermont, requires the specific menu item to have an asterisk to indicate it's an undercooked food product so that the consumer is well aware of that. The health department does outreach from time to time to try to increase food safety education amongst the public about some of these risks with a lot of these different food products. But at the end of the day, it is a choice that consumers make, and we do want them to be well informed of those risks.
And relatively, we make it pretty easy for those producers to bring their products to market. And so what I'm trying to understand is my health risk when my burger is undercooked versus my health risk from raw milk, because we put one producer through both they're all regulated, they're all tested, they're all following rules up the wazoo, and one of them, in terms of beef, I can easily buy it right at a farm, at the farmer's market, from my farmer who I'm getting vegetables from, who connects with another farmer. So, the raw milk advocates are not even asking for anything close to the lax availability that we have for beef. So is that because you could get way sicker with raw milk than undercooked beef, or is it about the same health risk? That's what I'd like to understand.
Sure, it's a good question. I think there's a much larger population that eats ground beef compared to the population that drinks raw milk.
Sure.
The beef industry is highly regulated, and inspectors on site during slaughter and processing while it's being produced. So it's very different, the regulatory systems, I would say. Vermont does have a great does have regulations for these raw milk producers, as Molly indicated. So that is different than some other states. But the pathogen is similar. One of them of concern is STEC, so the Shiga toxin producing E. coli has been associated with ground beef outbreaks. And also, we indicated it is a pathogen that can be seen in raw milk associated illness as well. There's others, Campylobacter, Listeria, Salmonella, that we discussed. And maybe just to clarify for Molly's question, so the data that we did share was cases of Campylobacter through the interview with the health department that indicated they drank raw milk. So these were data points for raw milk drinkers in Vermont.
Okay, so the risks are kind of similar. The scale is way different, and you're comfortable with the way we regulate meat sellers. That does seem to be working. I mean, you don't hear about that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that that point is clear. So of the folks with Campylobacter, there are a group of them that told us their source, and 87% of those drank raw milk only. And then the rest ate products. And for cryptosporidiosis, of the people who told us their source, 58% only had consumed either goat or cow milk, and the rest had products like cheese made out of raw milk.
You good, Chris?
Yeah, thank you. It's helpful.
Molly, could you tell us, or maybe Elizabeth, the difference between bacteria in goat's milk versus cow's milk? Is there a difference? And because this includes both goat and dairy cow milk, so is there any major difference in the makeup of those two milks to that one would have a higher bacterial level than the other?
Elizabeth might be able to speak to this as well, or possibly Julia. I can just say that biologically, goat milk has a higher somatic cell count just because of the biology of the animal, and that has been considered in the testing requirements.
Thanks, Molly. And I would just add that we've seen human illness from folks that have drank both cow milk or goat milk.
But no greater incidence from goat milk than cow milk or dairy milk?
I can't speak to that. Some of it, may be how many folks drink each. And I think some of this just gets back to my point about we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg in the reported cases. And also these are the folks that have completed an interview and felt comfortable sharing, that they drank raw milk and even where they drank raw milk from. So there's, some aspect of it always that we're just collecting information. We're not trying to get anybody in trouble. We just are asking the standard foodborne illness questions as part of the, the case interview. So similarly to some of the challenges during COVID investigation, folks, just need to be comfortable sharing information with the health department that helps inform the data.
Well, we can probably pick that information up right from the ag agency. I know the level of bacteria with goats is higher, than with dairy cows, because of their makeup. What about why couldn't our new state lab that we have in Randolph, why couldn't they do more testing, or this test that may have to go now to Cornell or out of state? Why couldn't that be performed at our lab down there?
Yeah, that's a good question, Senator Starr. I think that's probably a best question answered by the Agency of Agriculture, whose lab that is, and UVM. I don't want to speak for them regarding their testing programs.
Well, we know UVM can test it, but they aren't certified. So what about you, Molly?
As far as I am aware, the state lab in Randolph does not provide those tests.
But you haven't been given a reason why, so that's another question for the agency. And we found that you can't, it's against the law for an individual to transport this milk across state lines. So as far as if we sell it here and somebody transports it to New Hampshire or Maine or wherever, they're actually breaking the law by transporting it. Yep. Brian, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just want to make sure I understand, Molly. You mentioned that there was a lobbying effort on the part of dairy. Were you in the House at all when you heard testimony on this bill?
Yes, I have been present for just about
Okay.
all of the testimony.
All right. So did the House hear specifically from someone from the dairy industry that opposes this?
No, well, it depends on how you think about that. The Agency of Agriculture does not have a position on this bill at the moment, but in the past, they have not been supportive of expanding raw milk sales. And the reasoning that we hear regularly is due to the threat of the Vermont brand. There is a lot of fear, and I think it's very important to notice how that it's a very controversial topic at times, and it is driven by a lot of fear. And I think that there are extremes on both ends of that fear, and then on the opposite end of that, that raw milk is completely safe. And I think we have heard a lot of testimony about how there is significant risk, just like there are with consuming other foods related to raw milk. But it is mostly the fear that someone, probably in New York City or Boston, which would not be legally allowed to consume raw milk anyways, would get sick and then would tarnish the Vermont brand. But I think it's important that we consider all of our farmers when we're having this conversation. And not just our commodity dairy farmers, who are, of course, very important to this state, but there is 600 and some odd farmers, and less every single week or month, that are shipping dairy in a commodified way. And there are over 7,000 small diversified operations, many of which would be interested in selling raw milk if the regulations made it more reasonable.
And I'm sure that we will have the Agency of Ag in to tell us what my question was specifically lobbying interests for dairy. Did they come into the House and testify against this bill?
Not this bill, but when we've worked on this issue in the past, that has certainly happened.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And my only comeback to the Vermont brand, y'all interfering with that. A few years back, we tried, you see the milk tankers going down the interstates constantly, and they aren't all stopping in southern Vermont. They're going on to Boston and Hartford and Providence and the metropolitan areas. And we tried to set up a system where we would brand that milk as Vermont milk on the carton, and one of the largest co-ops in Vermont was adamantly against that, because it's milk from everywhere that ends up there, and we wouldn't want to use the name Vermont on it. And of course, what they were afraid of is if somebody went in the store and saw milk with Vermont on it, they'd probably pick it up and leave the other milk sitting there, and they didn't want that to happen. So they wouldn't use the Vermont brand to promote Vermont milk. Yeah, that was rough. The other question, I guess, Molly, I don't know if you answered this yesterday or not, but the question has come up a couple of times about allowing farm stands to sell product. But yet we know, and you know, that all farm stands are not, there are not people there all the time. Some of them have their little coin boxes. So how would we, if we were going to allow that, would we not allow a farm stand that is not manned, 100% of the time? from being able to handle raw milk?
Thank you for the question. And I think if the committee decided to move forward that way, it would be overwhelmingly devastating to the raw milk community, because the reality is that the vast majority of raw milk is sold from unstaffed farm stands currently.
Well, yes, unstaffed or staffed?
Unstaffed. And as mentioned, a lot of these farmers are milking just a few cows. They are often not farmers that have employees. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent to set to require our farmers to become retailers when in actuality they should be farming.
So how do we do the contact tracing? How do we make sure the milk's staying below, 42 or 40 degrees? How do we, as people that if we allow this, how are we assured that that happens?
So the current requirement is that milk must remain at 40 or below 40 degrees, I think it is, at all times. And farmers have testified about their refrigerator setups and temperature logs that they check daily. That's not currently required in the statute, but is something that is happening and something that farmers are willing to do. The way that the transactions work is all raw milk customers must provide their full contact information. And currently in the law, they provide that as well as a transaction log. And right now in this bill, the farm stand and CSA owners would collect that contact information, and then within 1 week, they would transfer that to the farm that produced the milk. And that is so that if there was an issue, it would be easy and fast for the Agency of Agriculture to access that information from one point. Also included in this bill is giving the agency the ability to inspect all establishments that are selling raw milk to ensure that they are doing so in a safe manner. Does that answer your question, Senator?
Well, it confuses my question, that's for sure, because I can't understand. I mean, you hear people with farm stands, or we do anyways, occasionally, they come in and say that people have come to their farm stand and take veggies and take the money out of the little box, and in some cases take the whole box. And here we want to allow people to be able to come to the farm stand, pick up milk, and sign in that they've picked up a gallon of milk.
Yes.
And nobody there. I mean, I don't know how we're going to verify.
Well, I think it's important to emphasize that this has been the system for 12 years, and we've heard significant farmer testimony about the compliance of customers and the high level of responsibility that customers are taking. And so they are providing their contact information. There's a lot that can be accomplished through very clear signage, and also communicating with the person that's often on the property and around. They might not be manning a register around the clock, but they are often available. And so customers are holding up their end of the bargain. And they are currently required by law to be offered a farm tour by the producer, just so they can see how the state of the farm and how things are ran. And it's been working, Senator. That's all.
Yep. Chris, you had a question.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that that's not what this bill is asking about, right? This is about the next step of the farm stand down the road, so that, or a CSA, as I understand it. And I had a constituent who was asking to have it, there's a small bakery around the corner from her farm where people pick up their CSAs, and it would be so cool if she could send her customers there, because they're their customer has to make 2 or 3 stops, and she's saying, could we speed it up? My question for you, Molly, is in the current setup, can I just drive up to a farm that sells raw milk and buy it? Because we used to have to pre-order, and there had to be that pre-existing relationship. Can you help us remember where we are with that currently?
If you go to the farm that the milk was produced and you provide your full contact information, you can legally buy raw milk if you record that transaction. And again, the farmer is required to inform the customer to keep the milk refrigerated and also to offer the customer a farm tour.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Other questions from committee members? And Molly, do you have any questions for us?
Thank you for asking that, Senator. And I would just reemphasize my desire to bring farmers into this committee room to provide testimony. They can speak to this much more closely and passionately than I can. And it truly is their reality. And this is, again, a group of farmers that we need to be celebrating and lifting up because they've been doing an exemplary job rather than having them feel like they are persecuted.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly have some farmers in. That's for sure. Anthony?
Yeah, just 2 comments, which you've probably already heard, but one is that I do think bringing in some farmers would be important to talk to the farmers who are actually setting up these systems. And I want to just emphasize what you said before, Bobby, about there not being a Vermont brand. I mean, the Ag Department being concerned about harming the Vermont brand. I wish we had a Vermont brand of milk that we could worry about doing harm to, but they've consistently resisted developing a Vermont brand. So I just don't buy that argument that people are not going to say, oh, somebody got sick from raw milk in Vermont, so I'm not going to buy food. I'm not going to buy, Agrimark milk anymore, or Hood milk. That's just a ridiculous argument. Big blunt.
Yeah. Yeah. We found that out years ago when we put it on their packaging.
Yeah.
So is there anything else from any of our guests or from committee members in regards to questions? If not, thanks a lot for you folks to be with us this morning. And we're going to be working on this for a bit, having different witnesses in. And you're certainly welcome to any of our meetings and to participate. So with that, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So committee, do we have anything else lined up for sure for this morning, Linda? I think it's open.
It's open.
Yeah. So we need to talk about our S-100 bill. That's on hold until next Thursday. And the reason for that was, of course, the communications that all senators received in regards to the harm that universal meals was going to bring to so many school districts, financial harm. And so we need to devise and hear from I think we need to hear from like 1 or 2 school districts that utilize universal meals and see how devastating it was to their budget and how they had to go back to the taxpayers and get all those big tax increases. And then we ought to hear from some of the schools that feel that if they do institute the program, how it's gonna financially ruin them, and they're gonna have to do away with other critical subjects and maybe a sports or two program because it's gonna cost them so much. And what I'd like to do is have them both in the room in our meeting at the same time and start with the school with the universal meals program. And I haven't got a clue what we would hear, but it kind of, from just being around and knowing a little bit about the way things work, if a school district did have universal meals and it was costing them all outdoors, they would have done away with it long before now. And I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on how we can ease that thought amongst our fellow senators about these letters that they've been getting, how school districts would have to do away with other key programs if it was going to cost a lot of money. Not that I agree with raising school budgets to take care of this. It should be part of the overall school budget, and that's what I was intending to have happen anyways. It would just be part of their school costs. Brian, you had
So-
your hand.
Just in terms of a process question, and this is just a question, does it make sense for us to ask to have the bill recommitted back to us? If we want to work on changing it, it seems like it'd be better if we had it here. And also, would it be better to invite Senate Ed in to hear from these schools so that we're not, again, trying to tell somebody else what we heard? In other words, they could hear it firsthand too. So those are just two questions.
Well, we aren't going to call the bill back in committee because it's made crossover by being on the calendar. So
Okay.
we don't want to get into that battle. And Brian, I tried to talk Brian into doing a couple of joint meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday, and he hemmed and hawed about it because he's awful busy with a couple of issues, but possibly that will change, and then it would be most helpful if we could do that together, both committees. And I'll keep checking with Brian, but I know yesterday when we visited, he thought he was going to be booked right tight up, and I had us all booked for next Tuesday, Wednesday, and I had Linda call and email those folks and change it because of the importance of getting this done and try to get it pushed over to the House. Chris?
Two questions. I'm pretty convinced that part of the confusion in the school community is that they don't understand. I think there's broad understanding that if you hit your 40% free and reduced, the feds will pick up the tab for your whole program. That I think they get. What I'm only coming to understand myself, and so I assume it's not well understood. And in one email yesterday from the Chittenden South District, superintendent, it was very clear they did not understand. The feds, as soon as you say as a school, we're going to do universal meals, the feds come in with money. They don't pay for the whole thing unless you have your 40% free and reduced. But they come in with money, and it is significant. So, for instance, the Chittenden South said in their email, this will cost us $1 million. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how could you be 4% of the whole state? If it's going to cost 25 million in the whole state, how could one district be such a huge portion? And so I was poking around. It's because they're not accounting for the influx of federal money. And you'll remember in our bill, we mandate a maximization of federal dollars. And that has to do with some data collection. With your first year, they create a so-called base year. So just to say, to some degree, our colleagues are not, I barely understand it. We've been talking about it for 2 years. Our colleagues, I'm certain, don't fully understand it. And I'm pretty confident the schools are not fully understanding some of the external money that we're talking about. And so it's freaking them out in terms of a shock to the budget. But anyway, just to put that out there. The other thing is the local food incentive. Bobby, that got stripped because it's just budget, right? Basically, it's just money. But it's a very powerful, people want to do it. That is the least controversial. It's not a lot of money, and we would be very wise to use some of our economic development dollars to go that way, in my opinion. But I don't want us to lose. We've not been talking about that lately, and I think it's a part of what is important about this proposal. So anyway, I just want to flag that and encourage us to not, even though it's technically dropped as appropriations has amended the bill, I think we should keep talking about it and keep the pressure up to do that.
And the other thing we haven't talked a bit about, or very little, if any, is the healthy foods issue, about how if you get these children started early on good healthy foods and keep them from becoming obese, that they'll continue along those same lines as they grow older and stay healthier. And I think we all received a memo or something from Chris Bray a day or two ago about how the younger children of today have a shorter life expectancy than like when we were growing up, because they're not eating healthy and they're so their life expectancy from obesity is shortened. And last night at that meeting, I think Jenny picked up a little bit on that, Jenny Lyons, and I didn't know if we had a chat with her, her committee might even look into that angle of it and come on board to help promote this bill with using local produce, local grown foods, and having healthier meals. So I don't know. What do you think about having a couple of the schools in that use that do universal meals and a couple that don't, and what school districts would you recommend? I know Burlington, I believe Burlington is a universal meals school, and
some of our
it's got to be one of the largest. Pardon?
It's not all of our schools, so it's not district wide. It's some of the schools. But we've heard from Doug, I forget his name, I think in terms of the schools that are already doing it, we could reach out to Faye and Betsy, and because they would know people that are the, you know, would tell a good story, that they work with the whole universe of these people, I think. Does that, I'm happy to do that if that makes sense to you, Bobby.
Yeah, well, yeah, I did. I think I told you I did talk with Faye yesterday morning or the morning before, and told her we had to get our ducks lined up, and I know she was working on stuff with, you know, from their side. I'm sure yesterday and again today, and is going to be, you know, willing to do whatever. So why don't you double check with her? And what about getting the superintendent in that sent the letter from the school district that's already in universal meals, but he sends a letter complaining about the universal meals program? How about inviting that guy in for a little visit?
I was just going to suggest that, Bobby, if we could get the Superintendent's Association, the School Boards Association, and there was a third group that was part of that letter, and I can't remember.
Well, the principals.
Principals.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
If we could get the three of them to kind of, I don't want to say endorse the bill, but at least back off, you know, as much as possible, I think that'd go a long way to helping us out.
They want a free lunch, Brian.
they're only going to back off if we just pay for it.
Yeah,
I mean,
if we say okay.
I think I like the idea of having a superintendent in, not the association, really find out about what's going on the ground. And because the organizations have staked their ground, they've not been helpful actors in terms of saying, you know, here's what you need to do to help us, have us be supportive. I'm much more interested in the people that are actually doing the work, coming in and telling us what the implications would be.
Same thing for AOE.
I mean, we've heard from them.
Plus, I had Linda try to get hold of Rosie to set some time up for Tuesday and Wednesday. And that issue is, we need to know for certain if what the feds pay on universal meals, you know, because there's freaking all kinds of numbers out there. And if they pay for one price for all meals, do they pay a different price for the people that are going to be the new people that are going to be getting free lunches? And each, like, you get rid of the reduce, you get rid of the free, do you get rid of all those things and the feds just pay you X per meal? And does it matter on the size of the hot lunch program? If you're feeding, it would seem to me, if you were feeding 500 kids, you might be able to feed them cheaper than if you were feeding 50 kids. So is there price differentials for different size schools? You know, we haven't really done much of that. Just that it works, but our colleagues really got gun shy yesterday after getting all those letters the day before from the three groups, and I don't know if the three groups are all one group, or if all three groups are three separate groups that joined in on one letter to all of us. But I know it certainly got the attention of our, and yet we didn't hear a thing from them all during January and February and 2 or 3 weeks into March. We didn't hear a word from any of them. You want to get some other people coming in?
Faye told me she's working. Faye told me she's working on a list for Linda. She'll have that soon.
Okay. Yeah, good. And I didn't think we had a lot of opposition last night at our meeting. Did you, Chris?
No, I think we're softening. I think, I think we'll get there with time, and it's not clear to me if we'll have to make some tweaks or just get more information out so that people know how to respond to their superintendents. I don't know, but I mean, it's a tricky thing when our colleagues rightly want to know more details than what I'm comfortable with is we are going to figure this out. You could forgive them for not having enough faith there, but we'll get there.
Well, yeah, I feel bad about them not having more faith in us. Any freaking bill we've ever shipped out of ag's been a moneymaker as far as I know, and saved millions of dollars for whoever it was set up to help. And I don't know of one bill that we've ever done where it turned into a boondoggle and cost anybody money. And if this figure wasn't set up about right, so our schools could do it without costing them money and cutting school programs, you wouldn't see my name on it. Because I've been a public school advocate my whole life. And so you aren't going to do something that's going to cause them harm.
Just so folks know that this idea of paying for it off the top of the ed fund, so it's still the ed fund, but it doesn't show up in the local budget. I have asked JFO to help us understand the cost there. It's not as simple as 25 million off the top, because what about those 80 schools that are already doing it? You can't penalize them. So trying to figure out what it really would look like, at least to my mind, that's worth pursuing just for the idea of getting this moving, keeping this moving. I don't know that it's a great idea or a terrible idea. I just don't know, but
aren't we talking about phasing this in over time?
yes,
Yeah,
that's
5
another
years.
trick.
So why do we keep saying $25 million if it's not going to be $25 million for 5 years or so from now, right?
Well, and it could be 6 years. I mean,
So what's it going to cost next year?
Yet. Well, next year, all indications are that the feds are going to extend the school meals program out for another year. So this coming school year, will 9 out of 10 chances it'll be covered by the feds anyways, just like this year is. And
I kind of wonder about, and I don't want you to think I'm not obviously I'm supportive of what we're talking about doing, regardless of how we go about doing it. But I mean, I think to me, it seems like there's this possibility that if schools are not going to have to do it right away, like they're all making it sound like they're going to have to come up with $1 million next year. And that just doesn't seem to be true, unless I'm missing something. And I mean, in a sense, schools have the option of opting out of this whole thing, and I don't want to see them opt out, but that's important information if that's the case. I mean, that you don't have to do it right away.
Right, but according to the bill, on or before July 1st, 2026, each school district shall comply with this bill.
it gives them 5 years, but we can move that date out too, Brian, at least by 1 year. And
Or you could you can do something about saying that you'll reevaluate it in 2026 and decide where to go from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, but if you do that, then nobody will do it.
Well, I think I hear what you're saying, but I'm not so sure that that's the case, because if it really does work and there really are schools that are doing it, I think some schools would decide to do it. And I think that if some decide to do it and it sort of grows over time because it's working, it'll convince those hardcore ones who are really opposed that maybe this is not such a bad idea because we're seeing our neighboring school districts do it.
Right
I have
now,
a
we just got,
I'm sorry, Chris, I had a question about a definition of education spending. It's in the part of the bill that I was going to report on, section 3. So for purposes of calculating excess spending pursuant to education spending, it shall not include costs incurred by a school district or supervisory union to provide breakfast and lunch. That was in our original bill, but I thought, according to Jim Demaray's section by section, it was taken out by appropriations. But then when I read the bill from the calendar, it's back in again. So I don't think appropriations did strike it.
I don't recall us taking that part out. And I think that's very important to leave in. There's a certain group of school districts that are right on the edge of being in excessive spending. And if this did cost them some money, it could tip them over the edge, and that's why that's there, is to protect that little group that's right on the, they watch every dime that they spend because they're so close to the edge of excess spending.
And what happens if they fall into that thing? Does the property tax rate go up to cover it?
Well, there's a whole, you mean if your local district messes up and goes into that excess spending, yeah, I think there's ramifications there that aren't very pleasant, and we didn't want to cause that, so that's why that's in there.
Okay. There's a lot of things here I still don't understand.
So
I think we need to gather information that we need, maybe propose an alternative, but stay focused on getting this over to the House. I mean, there's a long way to go here, and we are not going to have this perfectly buttoned up. And it just has to have some iteration from an input from more than what we can pull together. I mean, we should do our best, continue to do our best, but to me, it's important that we also keep our eye on the need to push it over.
Yeah. What about, are you guys, Brian and Corey, are you getting a lot of pushback from your other 5 people?
Oh, yeah.
I am, but you get pushback from schools no matter what you do. And
I'm not worried about that. I meant your colleagues in the Senate.
Oh, yeah, we get some, but I think it's one of those, it's people who are used to, they get 1 or 2 emails from somebody and they think the whole world's upset at them. I think there's concern about costs, but it's such a small amount of ed funding costs.
Yeah, it's a 25 cents on the 1,600 or something like that, $160 at 25 cents or something. I'm Chris.
And the way I look at it, some of the superintendents who reached out to us, like I have there's schools in their district that do this. Like probably half of my schools already have universal school meals. So,
well, we need to get that list of schools that have universal meals and publicize that to our colleagues that, look, in your district, you already have 8 schools or 10 schools or 3 schools that use this program. And I can't tell you who the 70 to 80 school districts are, but Rosie should be able to tell us that. So, any other things that we should be working on to line up for Tuesday and Wednesday? And if you do think of anything that or any people that we need to get in, give Linda a call and we'll get it on the list to get going with. So, because I figured 2 days we gotta stick pretty close to it to get our stuff done. So, anything else to come up this morning?
Nope.
No, you all set? Well, if
We're on at 11:30, right?
yes. So with that, I guess we'll just call it. We'll call it quits, and we'll see you at 11:30.